Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Okay, welcome. Nutritional pharmacist Jerry Hickey. I'm also the scientific director over here at Invite Health, and I want to continue my conversation on cocoa and brain health today. Recently, I did an episode discussing cocoa and brain health. We covered some studies. Now, before we go into more of the memory studies on cocoa, let's talk about pollution. When you look at pollution that comes out of autos, cars, buses, trucks, or pollution that comes out of those boilers that heat water in those big apartment buildings and factories and hospitals, etc., it releases fine particulate matter. Fine meaning it's really tiny. And when you inhale this, it inflames the lungs, but it very easily is solubilized into your blood. And when it mixes into the blood, it shoots right from the lungs into the heart, which inflames the heart, but then the heart pumps that pollution all over the body. So they found that pollution that you inhale is involved with fatty liver, a decline in kidney function, damage to the heart, strokes, but also memory loss. It gets into the brain and inflames the brain. There were several studies from the University of Montana, Missoula, along with other academic research institutions, looking at children who lived in an urban area with a lot of air pollution. And they compared them to children that lived in more pristine surroundings out in the country with clean air. And they found that the kids living in the city that were exposed to all this air pollution, they had an inflammation in their brain and their heart. And they didn't do well academically. It was affecting their mental function. It was affecting their memory and their judgment, their processing. But also, they found plaques in their brain that you'd normally see in 70 or 80-year-old elderly adults, that are the kind of plaques you see in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. So they put them on a high-quality cocoa, and within 9 to 21 days, the level of inflammation in their heart and in their brain dropped, and they were doing better academically. They were doing better in memory function tests. So cocoa really means something for the brain. Not only does it help restore circulation to the aging brain, which we discussed in the first part of this discussion of cocoa and the brain, not only does it help restore memory in aging people, but it helps defend the brain from inflammation and toxins and pollution. They've also shown that a number of the ingredients in cocoa calm the brain down, like if you're an anxious, nervous person, it helps with stress and nervousness. There's a number of ingredients that would help with that, such as anandamide, which is the bliss molecule. So now let's get back to our discussion of cocoa and memory in aging people. This happens to be a very important study. It's published in the journal Nature Neuroscience, and it's NYU, New York University, and Columbia University Medical Center in New York. And it really confirms a bunch of things. First of all, they found memory function, that age-associated decline in memory function has to do with a part of the brain called the dentate gyrus. The dentate gyrus sits next to the hippocampus, which is the major organ for memory. And they found that with age, as circulation to the brain declines, that these two organs start to shrink a little bit and they pull apart and they don't function well together, and this affects memory. So they found in this study, when they gave elderly people high quality cocoa, really high quality cocoa, very high in cocoa flavin-threols, they were actually called flavin-threols, that it was restoring circulation to the dentate gyrus, and that the dentate gyrus was connecting better with the hippocampus, and that they were rewiring together and creating connectivity, and they were starting to fire together, and memory improved. So here's what they said. Here's the study, and here's what they said. because this is a part of the brain where age affects memory. This is where you get your memory decline. So these are healthy people in New York between the age of 50 to 69. It's a 3-month-long study. And they gave them either a high flavanol cocoa drink or a low flavanol cocoa drink every day for 3 months. Now, they were giving them memory function tests, and they were also performing brain imaging with functional MRIs to see how the brain was working. So here's what they said. When we imaged our research subjects' brains, we found noticeable improvements in the function of the dentate gyrus in those who consumed a high cocoa flavanol drink. Now, this is Adam Brickman. He's an associate professor of neuropsychology at the Taub Institute. The Taub Institute is part of Columbia University. They do research on the aging brain. They do research on Alzheimer's disease. So listen to this. This is Scott Small, who's a very famous brain researcher. The high flavanol group also performed better on the memory test. If a participant had the memory of a typical 60-year-old at the beginning of the study, after 3 months, that person on average had the memory of a typical 30 or 40-year-old. So the memory of a 60-year-old went down to that of a 30 or 40-year-old. I've never seen a stronger statement than that on anything to do with the brain. So this is the University of L'Aquila in Italy. But I know that Georgetown University and a couple of other research institutions were involved with this. It's the journal Frontiers in Nutrition. And what they did, they bundled together a bunch of studies. And they found that people who lost memory, they got the most benefit from cocoa. The cocoa flavanols benefited their memory the most. So they looked into the effects of cocoa flavanol ingestion. Some of the studies were only 5 days long. Some of the studies were 3 months long. In the elderly, they found notable effects, improvements with paying attention and processing speed, in other words, how quickly the brain worked and how quickly you took in information, working memory, verbal fluency, remembering words, having a good conversation. Here's what they said. Older adults whose memories have started to decline or who have other mild cognitive impairments appeared to benefit the most from ingesting this cocoa for a prolonged period. If you look at the underlying mechanism, the cocoa flavanols have beneficial effects for cardiovascular health, so there's the circulation again, and can increase cerebral blood volume and the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. So we're back to that part of the brain that suffers with age that affects your memory. So, in other words, if you have a healthy brain and you're older, it'll help it, but if you lost memory, you'll get even more benefit. So here's even a worst case scenario. This is mild cognitive impairment. This is in the journal Hypertension, which is one of the major journals of the American Heart Association. And here's what they're saying. Cocoa flavanols can improve mild cognitive impairment according to their research. Now this includes memory, processing speed. Mild cognitive impairment is a problem. There's a real issue with memory here. Like somebody with mild cognitive impairment, their brain has gone through unduly shrinking. It shrunk more than typical. And this really affects their memory and their reasoning skills and their logic. For instance, it's hard for them to understand complex directions, like figuring out how to use a GPS or their new cell phone or their computer. I mean, they are having issues. A mild cognitive impairment affects up to 25% of people over the age of 60, but about 80% of those people will go on to develop Alzheimer's. So it's kind of a prodromal stage. It's kind of like an opening to the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So they found that when they gave these people cocoa, it actually was improving their brain function, improving circulation to their brain, and improving memory functions and how quickly the brain worked. This is all really good. I mean, there's true benefit for cocoa in the aging brain. It protects the brain from inflammation, because the antioxidants in there are anti-inflammatory. It helps restore antioxidant activity to an aging brain because antioxidant levels decline in the aging brain, and neurons, your memory cells, are prone to damage by free radicals. When there's no antioxidants, you can't quench the free radicals. They could kill a lot of brain cells. This contributes to memory decline and shrinkage of the brain. Cocoa restores circulation to the aging brain. Cocoa protects the aging brain from pollution. Cocoa protects aging brain cells in general, And cocoa helps restore memory functions to an aging brain, as well as restoring the bliss neurotransmitter, anandamide, which helps click your mood up and helps you handle stress. It's all good. Focus, short-term memory, all kinds of brain functions will improve with cocoa. You don't need that much. There's been studies showing that if you have cocoa just 2 or 3 times a week, it helps lower your risk of a stroke. It helps lower your risk of a heart attack. But for memory, you need to have cocoa daily. And 1 scoop a day is plenty. Now, just a tip. Cocoa is anti-inflammatory. There's research showing that when you mix cocoa with milk, it takes away some of that anti-inflammatory effect. You're better off mixing cocoa with almond beverage or water or soy beverage or rice beverage than mixing it with dairy. Okay, I want to thank you so much for listening. And thank you for tuning into the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Please make sure you subscribe. Please leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram or at Invite Health. We'll see you next time on another episode of the Invite Health Podcast.